Japan ranks among the most densely populated and urbanized nations on the planet. Seen from above, its Pacific coastline appears almost unbroken, a vast ribbon of concrete, steel, highways, and rail lines stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Tokyo seamlessly merges into Yokohama. Yokohama dissolves into Shizuoka. Shizuoka gives way to Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and Hiroshima. Nearly 80 million people are packed into this narrow coastal strip, forming one of the most concentrated urban corridors in human history. Yet crossing the mountains that run through the center of the country feels like entering another Japan entirely. Along the Sea of Japan, the pace slows. The land opens up. Cities still exist, but they're smaller, more widely spaced, and closely tied to surrounding farmland and mountains. Niigata, Kanazawa, Toyama, and Tottori feel distant not just geographically, but culturally and economically from the endless sprawl of Tokyo. Few developed countries display such a stark internal divide, two coastlines within the same nation, yet radically different patterns of urban life. So why did Japan concentrate so much of its population, infrastructure, and economic strength along the Pacific coast, while the western side remained comparatively restrained? At the center of this divide is Japan's mountainous spine. The Japanese Alps stretch down the middle of Honshu, the country's largest island, forming a towering natural barrier between east and west. These mountains aren't gentle hills. They rise steeply, with sharp peaks, narrow valleys, and slopes that plunge toward the sea. On the Pacific side of these mountains, Japan was handed a rare geographic advantage. Vast flat plains opened up near the coast, most notably the Kanto Plain surrounding modern Tokyo, and the Kansai Plain around Osaka and Kyoto. These plains offered fertile soil, wide river systems, and land that could support large-scale agriculture long before modern machinery existed. Flat land meant food security. Food security meant population growth. And population growth made cities possible. On the western side, geography told a different story. Here, mountains drop almost directly into the Sea of Japan. Coastal plains exist, but they are narrow, fragmented, and squeezed between steep slopes and rough seas. There was simply no room for cities to spread outward in the way Tokyo or Osaka did. This difference alone shaped Japan's future. Today, roughly two-thirds of Japan's population lives on less than half of its land area, almost all of it on the Pacific side. The Sea of Japan coast, by contrast, holds a small fraction of the population despite stretching the same length of shoreline. Geography didn't just determine where people could live, it also determined who Japan traded with and how. For most of its history, Japan's strongest external connections ran south and east, toward China, Korea, Southeast Asia, and eventually the Pacific world. Maritime routes naturally favored the calmer waters and sheltered bays of the Pacific coast. Ports there were easier to access, safer for ships, and better connected to inland population centers. The Sea of Japan coast faced harsher conditions. Winter storms made navigation difficult, and the coastline lacked the large, naturally protected harbors that encouraged large-scale maritime trade. While trade with Korea and northern China did exist, it never rivaled the economic pull of the southern and eastern sea routes. As trade intensified, merchants settled near Pacific ports. Markets formed, roads improved, towns expanded. Every new connection reinforced the importance of the Pacific side and pulled more development toward it. By the time Japan entered the Edo period, this imbalance was already locked in. During the Edo period, Japan experienced an internal economic boom that reshaped the country's geography forever. Even as the Tokugawa shogunate restricted foreign contact, domestic trade surged. Rice, timber, textiles, paper, and crafts flowed between regions in volumes never seen before. This explosion of internal commerce demanded stable hubs, places where goods could be collected, priced, stored, and redistributed. Those hubs emerged overwhelmingly on the Pacific side. Edo, once a modest fishing village, was transformed almost overnight when it became the seat of political power. Samurai, administrators, artisans, and merchants flooded in. Within a century, Edo had grown into one of the largest cities on Earth. Osaka developed alongside it as the commercial engine of Japan, controlling rice exchanges that effectively functioned as early commodity markets. Kyoto remained the cultural and intellectual heart of the nation. Crucially, all three sat on the Pacific side, connected by relatively gentle terrain and navigable routes. This alignment created a powerful self-reinforcing system. Political authority attracted people. Population density created demand. Demand fueled markets. Markets justified roads, ports, and warehouses. Infrastructure then made growth faster and cheaper. On the Sea of Japan coast, communities existed, but they remained smaller, more isolated, and more focused on local survival than national dominance. The urban core had been born, and it faced east. When Japan entered the Sakoku period in the 17th century, foreign trade was dramatically curtailed. Only limited contact was permitted, and most international exchanges disappeared entirely. But this isolation didn't weaken Japan's cities. Instead, it redirected economic energy inward, intensifying domestic trade and reinforcing existing networks. With foreign markets closed, regions turned toward one another. Goods moved more frequently between Edo, Osaka, Kyoto, and the surrounding Pacific cities. Roads improved. River transport expanded. Coastal shipping along the Pacific became increasingly vital. These networks thrived because the geography allowed them to. Routes were passable year-round, terrain was manageable, and population centers were already dense. The Sea of Japan coast struggled to integrate into this system. Mountain barriers slowed overland travel. Harsh winters disrupted seasonal movement. Ports faced rougher seas and fewer reliable connections. Isolation didn't create these disadvantages, it exposed them. As a result, development didn't spread evenly. It concentrated where trade already flowed smoothly. By the time Japan reopened to the world in the mid-19th century, the outcome was already decided. The Pacific coast wasn't just more developed, it was deeply interconnected, economically dominant, and structurally prepared for modernization. Isolation didn't pause Japan's urban evolution, it sharpened its focus. When the Meiji government launched Japan's rapid modernization in the late 19th century, it didn't start from scratch. It built directly on existing economic and population centers. Factories, banks, ports, and government institutions were placed where infrastructure already existed, and labor was readily available almost entirely on the Pacific side. Tokyo solidified its role as the political and financial capital. Yokohama became the primary international port, handling trade with Europe and the United States. Nagoya emerged as a manufacturing hub. Osaka retained its commercial dominance. These cities formed a continuous corridor of growth, investment, and innovation. Railways followed the same logic. The Tokaido Line connected Tokyo to Osaka, creating the backbone of Japan's transportation network. When high-speed rail arrived in the 1960s, it reinforced this corridor even further, shrinking travel times and integrating labor markets. Businesses clustered where movement was fastest. On the Sea of Japan coast, progress was slower. Rail construction required expensive tunnels and complex engineering through the mountains. Smaller populations made large investments hard to justify. High-speed rail arrived decades later, after the economic gap had already widened. Infrastructure followed people. People followed opportunity. Each reinforced the other, locking the divide firmly in place. Winter is the Sea of Japan coast's defining challenge. Cold Siberian winds sweep across the relatively warm sea, absorb moisture, and release it violently when they collide with Japan's western mountains. The result is some of the heaviest snowfall on the planet. Cities like Niigata regularly receive multiple meters of snow each year. Mountain regions see far more. Roads close, rail lines slow or stop, ports become difficult to operate. For months, transportation and trade are disrupted. Historically, this made large-scale urban life extremely difficult to sustain. In contrast, the Pacific coast experiences dry, sunny winters. Temperatures may be cold, but movement continues. Goods flow, people commute, markets remain active. Over centuries, this seasonal reliability mattered enormously. Cities depend on constant circulation, food, fuel, labor, information. Snow breaks that rhythm. While West Coast communities adapted with resilience and self-sufficiency, they couldn't support the non-stop activity required by megacities. Climate didn't just inconvenience the West Coast. It quietly capped how large its cities could ever become. Japan's mountains aren't just scenic, they're economic barriers. Even today, crossing the Japanese Alps requires tunnels, bridges, and constant maintenance. These projects are expensive and technically demanding. For large cities, the investment pays off. For smaller ones, it rarely does. This creates a brutal feedback loop. Without population growth, infrastructure investment is hard to justify. Without infrastructure, population growth stalls. The Sea of Japan coast has been caught in this cycle for centuries. The Pacific side never faced this constraint. Flat plains allowed cities to expand cheaply and organically. Roads multiplied. Rail lines connected easily. Density became an advantage rather than a limitation. Geography didn't just shape settlement, it shaped economic logic. Over time, the mountains didn't merely divide Japan physically, they divided opportunity. Today, the imbalance is striking. The urban corridor from Tokyo to Fukuoka contains the majority of Japan's population, industry, and corporate power. Most major companies are headquartered there. Most exports leave from Pacific ports. Most international visitors arrive there. The Sea of Japan coast accounts for a much smaller share of manufacturing and corporate headquarters. Its largest cities are smaller than many Tokyo suburbs. As Japan's population declines, the gap has widened. Younger generations migrate toward opportunity. Smaller Western cities shrink faster. Some towns have lost over 20% of their population in a single generation. Tokyo, meanwhile, continues to grow. The system still feeds itself. But the West Coast didn't vanish. It adapted. Abundant water and rich soil made agriculture thrive. Niigata became famous for premium rice. Fishing fleets remained strong. Hokkaido developed specialized textile industries. Energy production, hydroelectric, and nuclear found space where dense cities could not. Tourism transformed a historical weakness into an asset. Heavy snowfall created world-class ski resorts. Mountains became hiking destinations. Quiet towns became refugees from urban intensity. The West Coast didn't lose. It evolved differently, working with geography instead of fighting it. Japan didn't become one uniform nation, but two complementary halves shaped by the land itself. Japan's development wasn't a mistake or a missed opportunity. It was the natural outcome of geography, climate, and trade patterns working together over centuries. The Pacific coast became dense, fast, global, and industrial. The Sea of Japan coast became resilient, spacious, traditional, and natural. The mountains that divide them also define them. The real question was never why Japan didn't build megacities on its west coast. The real question is how, given everything stacked against it, it ever could have.